Hi, I'm Dean Sponheim from Sponheim Sales Services, and we're going to continue our video series with cover crops. Josh talked about in the first video about maybe some of the planter things that we need to change when we're planting into cover crops, and also the nitrogen and fertility pieces that we need to worry about. I'm going to talk a little bit about termination of our cover crop. Basically, cereal rye. We're going to explain the differences between the two, first of all. There is a difference between ryegrass and cereal rye. Ryegrass is a little bit harder to kill. So we're going to talk basically about cereal rye because that's what we use most of in our area for cover crop that would overwinter. But there is some annual or some ryegrass that will survive the winter. So keep that in mind. Ryegrass is harder to kill. So when I talk about how we're going to kill or terminate the cereal rye, just make sure that you're doing this correctly, and then also maybe even enhance it a little bit more and make sure you're going by the guidelines. I have seen a lot of, there's been a lot of meetings, podcasts about termination and a lot of things on what you should and shouldn't do. I'm going to talk about some of the experiences that we've had since 2012 and some of the things that we have learned from the very beginning to more advanced, I would call, cover croppers. So we're going to talk a little bit today on this first one about if you're a first timer. And the first thing I want to talk about is what's your level of stress. I do that with all first timers with cover crops. Why I say that is if you're a little uncomfortable, you're not sure, especially terminating ahead of corn, especially with a cereal rye cover crop out there, let's terminate it as soon as we can. But there are a couple things we got to keep in mind before we start terminating rye. One is that the rye has to be actively growing, and most of the time, by the time you can cover the ground and not track it up with a sprayer, the rye is probably broken dormancy and it's growing aggressively, or at least growing, I shouldn't say aggressively. We'd like to see probably 5 to 7 inches of growth if we can before we spray it. And we would also like to see the daytime temperatures be above 60 or right around 60, and nighttime highs at least 40 degrees. We used to say the rule of thumb of average of 50 degrees, but we have seen big swings, especially this year, where we could see 60-degree weather and end up in the 20s at night. That's not what we want. We don't want to see any of that cold temperatures within the first 24 hours of spraying it. So it has to be the right conditions the day you do it. It needs to be sunny, it needs to be warm, and it needs to be that the rye is actively growing. We used to tell people way back when we started this 7-8 years ago that you should do it at least 2 weeks before you plant corn. Now that's still a good rule of thumb for your first timers, but I will caution you that if you do that, it could possibly be a hindrance as well, because when we terminate that far ahead and we get into a rainy spell and we have quite a mat out there, it can be a detriment instead of a positive thing. So keep that in mind, look at the weather forecast ahead, and hopefully not for a lot of rain ahead when you do that if you're going to do it that far ahead. Now, if you only have 5 or 6 inches of growth and you terminate it 2 weeks ahead, that'll probably melt down quite quickly and you won't have that cover where that ground will stay moist for too long. So those are some of the things, the first timers, that we got to look at. You got to know what your level of stress can handle, what you can handle, and the sooner the better in terminating. It's great. It's not the best for what we want to see in water quality and erosion purposes, because we'd love to have it grow longer, but for your level of comfort, that's what we want to do. A couple other things that we want to talk about on how to terminate. We want to make sure we're doing at least the full rate of glyphosate or glufosinate, whatever you're going to use to burn it down. And then also to make sure you're using 10 to 15, I would like to see 15 to 20 gallons, and sort of a fine mist. If you can use a flat fan and put a little more pressure on it and get more of a coverage, that would be great. You still got to watch for drift issues on neighboring crops, but usually when you're doing this, there isn't anything growing out there anyway, and there's no residual to it, so I'm not too concerned other than trees, shrubs, anything like that that might be growing close to the field. The other thing I want to talk about is make sure you quit spraying 4 to 5 hours before sundown. The rye plant will start to shut down that soon in the evening, and it'll stop taking that herbicide up. So make sure you are getting things done late morning, early afternoon to mid-afternoon. That's when you need to get it sprayed. If you don't, we have seen situations where the rye has not been killed completely, and when you have to come back and kill it the second time, it's not as easy. So just keep that in mind, and I think if you're a first timer, do it as soon as you can is our recommendation, and then go from there. That would be the best. But stay tuned, we're going to break this up into 2 more videos where we go to the intermediate adopters and then the long-term cover croppers, and we'll talk about how long we can let this cover crop grow. So thank you for now, and we'll just stay tuned and we'll be back at you soon.